I get the heart of what people say when they're like, I work to live, I don't live to work. I'm like, okay, I can get behind that. But it's part of who you are. You have a choice. You can engage in how it forms your identity, but you do not have a choice in whether or not it forms your identity. That is not an option available to you.
Welcome to Talking Calls, the show for sales, customer experience, and contact centers. We talk to leaders in these fields to discuss themes, trends, and pick apart the best practices that you need to know to run great customer experience and sales teams. If you want to provide great experiences in any industry, this is the show for you. Each episode will unpack components of the customer journey and the operations behind it and turn our guests' experiences into actionable items that you can take back to your team and your leaders to help you get that extra edge. If you want the highlights of these episodes and other great content to help you run your centers, you can subscribe to our free monthly newsletter in the show notes below. This episode I'm joined by Craig and Lino, and we get into what it means to be engaged at work, why you want to be, how to spot engagement and disengagement with your employees, and what engagement means versus quiet quitting. We dive right in with our co-host Craig talking about engagement. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So start off kind of like from yourself. Like, why do you want to be engaged when you're at work? And I'm a big believer in like the self-payoff, and greed drives good behavior. So like the greedy reason you want to be engaged when you're at work is that your goal when you're at work, to me at least, should be to make the most amount of money with the most consistent input you possibly can, and be as successful as you possibly can. Because that's going to be what kind of puts you on a good trajectory to be able to keep doing those things, to be able to keep making more money, to be able to keep developing yourself. And if you're not engaged, your opportunity is just going to miss you entirely at a fundamental level. You're not going to see the things that you could grab otherwise to take advantage of them. What I mean by that is, like, if you're sitting on a call and we're all having a conversation and people are bringing forth problems, the engaged people on the call are sitting down and saying, what can I do that fixes this problem for these people? And how can I step into this problem, take some of it onto myself and resolve it? And that same methodology is putting yourself out there for everyone in the organization. As a result, you'll more consistently achieve success. If you're not engaged in those interactions, you're saying, oh, this is Tom's problem, I don't need to worry about it. Now you're missing opportunities where even for like small investments of energy, you could resolve problems for people. Because what's easy to you is not going to be easy to other people. What's easy for them is not going to be easy for you. And so, if you're engaged, you're going to be more successful because you're taking on more and you're touching more parts of your industry. But also, you want an engaged workforce for the exact same reason. What's easy for other members of your team are going to create positive changes for other members of the team, right? What's easy for me is not necessarily what's easy for you. And so, if everyone in your team is getting engaged and everyone in your team is doing those little steps of work, everyone's workload goes down, but everyone's quality of output goes up, right? Because everyone's willing to spend 5 minutes to help the other person in something that would have taken them 30 minutes. And as a result, your overall efficiency increases and your workforce is happier because they don't if you can go into work and you can do less and produce more, everyone's a little happier. But also the situations that are stressful for them, that will really kind of beat on them, are being assisted by other people that don't find those situations stressful or difficult. And the situations they enjoy, the places where they excel or they exceed, are the things they're getting to spend more of their time doing because they're going out and helping other people with the stuff they excel at. And so there's a kind of self-fulfilling effect where if you're more engaged and you're working more with your workforce in that way, you're going to produce better, but you're actually going to end up doing less and you're going to be less stressed because the things you're going to be spending a lot of your time doing are the things that you're really good at.
It's like a virtuous cycle, right? The more you get to do the things that you like to do, the more you're plugged in, the more you get to do the things that you like to do, and then the more you're plugged in, right? And you get that kind of flywheel effect, continuing to turn that up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it for sure. When I think of, an employee who's engaged with the work that they're doing, I think of somebody who just genuinely cares about the output and the outcome at the end of the day, right? So, you know, pardon my French, but as I say, it's like, is your give a shit broken? Right? That's basically what I'm looking for when I'm trying to identify if somebody on my team is engaged or not. As a pain point, as an employer, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're just doing the bare minimum, even though we're all on a team, especially in like an environment, if you're a big think worker, if, generally speaking, you have a fairly small team of people who are all trying to get pretty complex problems solved, right? And if a guy is just showing up and just doing his piece and then going home, I mean, okay, like, I get it, but that's not going to help the team overall, right? It's not going to help us get to the solution that we want. And if you find yourself like in a place where you don't want to be engaged because you don't care about the work that you're doing, I mean, you're spending 8 hours a day there. Go work somewhere else. You know, especially right now, it's really kind of an employee's market, right? There's no reason for you to be stuck in a job that you don't like. I mean, some of that's going to be a mindset issue. There's people who just don't like the concept of work in general. They want everything to be fun, and even being a video game tester is not all fun and games, right? There's an element to it that's work. So the key for me is whether or not an employee is willing to put in the work and care about whatever it is that they're working on to make sure that it's successful, and that the unique perspectives that they bring to the table as an individual can be heard and, you know, can be used to improve whatever it is that we're working on.
Yeah. We both talked about the bare minimum. Is the bare minimum more impactful, or just doing the bare minimum more impactful in some types of jobs than others? You know, think about in leadership, in customer service, or in like widget building, right? Do you care if your roofer does
Sure.
the bare minimum?
Well, it depends what you mean by that, right? So, like in Ontario, we have pretty strict building codes and labor codes. So if the roofer is actually doing the actual minimum that is legally required, I'm probably okay with that. Like, 'cause the legal minimum that you can do as a roofer and still be actually doing your job is pretty good. Now, I mean, that's not, generally speaking, like there are certainly, yeah, I'm not picking on roofers. I used to do roofing, but like there are certainly roofing
it was just an
companies out
example,
there.
yeah.
Yeah, like there are certainly roofing companies out there that do less even than that, right? I know we're kind of beating around the bush on it, but like the problem with this whole like quiet quitting thing is that it's in like anything birthed out of TikTok, it's this ill-defined thing uh, that changes basically as you talk to people about it, right? So on one hand, people are like, well, you know, quiet quitting is just setting boundaries. I'm like, okay, I'm here for that. Like, I got a wife and I got a daughter and she's 6, and my days, generally speaking, of working 65, 70 hours a week are probably behind me for the time being, until my daughter gets a little older and my work-life balance is a little different. But I would not be in the position that I am now, like as in a director role of any sort, if I didn't put in 65, 70-hour weeks like leading up to it. Because there's a million other people just like me. And no matter how good you think you are, no matter how smart you think you are, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. Brian said something to me when I was a real young manager still, and I'm sure it's a quote from somebody else, but it's great. You know, he says, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, right? And that's classic. And I mean, as I've gotten older, I'm like, well, yes, but also no. If you're talented enough, then you don't have to work quite as hard. So it's degrees of each. You can be the best roofer in the world, but if you don't show up to work, I don't really care. Like, it just doesn't matter, right? So you got to show up and you got to put in the effort. So I don't know. We kind of went a long way around that, but like, yes, it definitely matters from trade to trade, from job to job. The impact of putting in the bare minimum. Like, I wouldn't want a firefighter that puts in the bare minimum. That would be catastrophic. People would die. Like, I wouldn't want a police officer that just puts in the bare minimum. People, like, I can't even imagine what that look. Well, I mean, yeah, you know, there's roles where people really got to do a lot more than the bare minimum that's asked of them.
Yeah, and maybe in my head, right, there's the bare minimum. There's a level below that, which is like the disgruntled bare minimum. And then
Yeah.
there's that kind of scale. Bare minimum to me talks about like, I'm here, I'm doing it. If you were to give me a score, I'm like a 6 or a 7, right? And in some jobs, 6 or a 7, great. But if you're in a leadership role or interacting with the public, customer service, or like your front desk at a hotel, your airline um, hostess, or cabin personnel, bare minimum there is a long way from the expectation, I think.
I think that there's an opportunity for people to better evaluate what they mean when they say that, now that this is kind of part of our culture. Because, like, the bare minimum of how we've looked at jobs has taken into account the fact that people would just do whatever they were asked, and that expectations would change randomly and considerably. And I think that the kind of the culture of the current workforce is like, if you're going to hire me to do a job, you and I both need to have a clear understanding of what that job entails. And right now, I don't think most companies have kind of caught up to that and said, okay, this is what the actual bare minimum, to kind of quote what this job is. This is what we expect from an employee, and this is how we're going to compensate you for that workload. We're not going to change the fact that kind of culture is moving in a direction, right? But we can adapt to that and be more honest up front with the expectations and say, this is what the bare minimum of this position is. Because the reality is that we all in our head have a bare minimum of what's acceptable for our job for a week, right? And something that you kind of hold yourself to as the bar, right? And when you look at, what your job entails, I think we can all honestly say that job description is pretty far away from that bar, even though everyone would agree at roughly where your bar is. And some of us might hold ourselves to a higher bar. Lino's bar is probably a little higher than mine. He's very harsh on himself, and I'm not. So, like, there's going to be some differences there. But, like, if we all sat down with Brian and said, like, what's the minimum you expect from our jobs, he's got a pretty good idea of what he expects us to take care of, and what in his head is going above and beyond. And I think that to deal with this kind of cultural shift is not to say, like, this isn't acceptable, is to say that as a group, we need to be more honest with what our expectations are. And come out and say, this is, like, if you're a leader in a company, it is expected that you make time available for your team, and that even when you're having a bad day, they don't feel it. Like, that is an expectation. If you don't feel you have those skills, that's fine. Like, you can work with your leader to learn those skills. There's courses, like, there's things we can do to help you. But that's the minimum. Like, that's the line. And a kind of a more honest dialogue around what those things need to look like would do a lot, one, to put better candidates into those pools where people who can't handle certain things, like we all know the stressful jobs when we look in our industry, and I'm sure other industries have the same thing. I wouldn't want someone with poor stress management skills to be my heart surgeon, as an example. Like, I think that there's some lines that you kind of want to draw, right? But I think that's probably the healthier approach towards trying to deal with this kind of cultural...
An understanding of maybe a career versus a job, or when you're aiming for something more, right? Or something bigger. I think a lot of people probably really happy in a role that they're in, or a role very close to the role that they're in. And for them, punching in, punching out is the idea. And then there's another group of people who maybe, you're the bare minimum line is a foot and a half above the bare minimum line for your job that, your boss or your peers would expect of you, right? And you keep pushing your line up, right? I think there's an important difference probably there between those career-minded people and maybe the transactional.
That right there is the issue, though, right? Like, making adjustments like this could work and have a big impact if everybody across the entire world all agrees to do the quiet quitting thing. But all it takes is like one or two hard charges in your organization who's like, that makes no sense. And they're going to get all the promotions, regardless of how just or unjust that might be, regardless of whether or not, this is a valid, labor movement, independent of any of that, right? There's going to be some guy who's making decisions and is looking at people's productivity. And if they see, one person that's staying later, coming in early, helping out in departments that he's not in charge of or she's not in charge of, they're going to get ahead. I have a problem drawing the distinction between a job and a career, and some of that's philosophical, right? So like there's a line that I like that is part of the reason why Craig makes that comment about the being hard on myself, but that it's scripture, but it says, "Do all work as if unto the Lord." And the premise behind that is whatever it is that you put your hand to, do it as if you're doing it for the biggest power on earth, right? Because it's not about your boss, because your boss might be a total whatever, and we've all had bad bosses, and like I think there's even a reality show about bad bosses. Like we know they're out there, right? But you can't control what your boss does, and you can't control what your employer does, but you can control what you do, and you can control how you respond to the stimulus that's put in front of you. That's what you have control over, right? That's what you have a choice about, and those choices are going to define you as a person. So for me, the question is, do I want to be the kind of person that allows a toxic leader to hinder my development or that lets a bad mindset hinder my development? Because the flip side of this whole like quiet quitting thing that people talking about is like quiet firing. So this concept that it's like, okay, well, the flip side of this coin is companies just doing the bare minimum to keep people employed.
I
Right?
don't need to spend
I've
time in
seen this.
developing you. I don't need to mentorship
Right.
you. We don't need to have one-on-ones. It's not that important. I'm just going to go and instead of spending 30 minutes with you developing you, I'm going to watch a movie.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we all came up in like the time when Walmart, I don't know if they still do it, but they got blasted for this all the time. The full-time hours is like 37, so we schedule people for 36 and a half hours, so we don't have to give them full benefits. It's like, come on, man. Like, we all see what you're doing. Like, it's not clever, right? But you can't control any of that. So you can leave, totally valid option. Don't like how you're like, vote with your feet. Don't like what your employer is doing, don't work for them. And with the Walmart thing, people are like, well, they're a big, huge employer, and if I don't work for them, then I have no job. But that's not the market today. Like, you literally go down the street with almost no job skills and get a job. People are dying to get people in the door. So that's not the issue anymore, right? So it's just, to me, it's all about, like, how much influence are you going to let these people have that you already don't like, have over your character as an individual,
Sure.
right?
I think it's a difference in approach, right? Like, what are you looking for in those 8 to 10 hours or 5 to 10 hours of your day when you're at work? Are you looking for a paycheck and then to get back to your day to day, and you're happy with what that paycheck is and you're happy with your contribution? Okay, fine, do the thing. If you're looking for more than that, if you're looking for development, if you're looking for a piece of your identity to grow as a career or to grow in an organization or to have an impact on things or to make change or solve problems creatively or whatever it is that motivates you, if you're looking for that in your job, if you, I don't want to say live to work, but like work is a part of your identity, then you're going to have a different approach to this than somebody who maybe works to live, and the work is a thing that they do so that they can afford the stuff that they do between 5 and midnight.
I mean, I would aggressively challenge that, right? If you think that you can do something for 8 hours a day, every day, 5 days out of the week, and it's not part of your identity,
I'm not saying
there
it's
is
a good
serious.
approach.
No, it's not about good or bad. Like, it's a lie that people tell themselves, right? I mean, I get the heart of what people say when they're like, I work to live, I don't live to work. I'm like, okay, I can get behind that, right? But it's part of who you are. You have a choice. You can engage in how it forms your identity, but you do not have a choice in whether or not it forms your identity. That is not an option available to you. Like, regardless of what we might think. I spend too much time here. Like, the people that I surround myself with at work form part of who I am.
Lino, to paraphrase your position here, doing the bare minimum is a bad idea because you're in it anyway. You can't not be involved in that. You would be happier, you believe, if you commit to it and try to make something of it. Don't do a thing half-assed. If you're going to pick up the log, man, and get on board. Right?
Yeah,
Craig, what do you
it's not,
think?
It is probably worth self-recognizing that the three of us are tenacious in our pursuit of expanding our career opportunities. So the perspective, and I'm not necessarily disagree. I do disagree with Lino, but I'm not aggressively disagreeing with Lino. I am saying is that, like, when we're looking at this as as the situation that it is, it's worth remembering to ourselves that all personal experience we have in approaching this led us to where we are, and we could never have done this and gotten where we are. So our understanding of what drives someone to do that's going to be limited by the nature of our character. Like, when I look at the conversations that are leading people to talk to have this viewpoint, it seems to be people that don't feel like they can get another job, right? Not that that's true, but that is their feeling. And as we all know, their perception will govern their reality, right? If they feel they can't get another job, they won't even apply. So they don't believe they have an out. They don't believe that they can move up. And as a result, they feel, correct or incorrect, that any amount of effort that they apply will not change their yield on life. And so why apply any? You know, if I only have 15 mental dollars to spend through the day, I'm going to spend as few as possible at work. And so rather than us beating on the fact that we disagree with this because we've developed the skills to work around that problem, maybe we should share from ourselves how we worked around that problem, or when you've struggled with it. Because the reality is, the people sitting in that chair, we had the skill, and I'm going to pick on Lino. Me and Lino were telesales agents. Right? Like, we took phone calls and we put dishes on roofs. That, and we got to where we are. That situation of being that telesales agent is where a lot of people in this situation feel like they're in. And we took away from that opportunity something very different. And so maybe sharing from each one of us our perspectives on how we went from looking at a job that would traditionally not be viewed as like a career path job, not be viewed with that level, how did we find the opportunities to succeed?
We're going to wrap there. Stay tuned for the conclusion of this conversation in episode 2 in the coming days, where we continue to talk about engagement, how to be successful at work, and some concrete tips for standing out and getting promoted in sales, customer service, and the contact center industry.